When I walked into the courtroom, my mom rolled her eyes and my dad wouldn't even look up. Then the judge stopped, leaned forward, and said, "Wait, is that really her?" The whole room went silent. My family had no clue who I really was until. You know that feeling when you walk into a room and the people who are supposed to love you most look at you like you're the dirt beneath their shoes? That was my reality every single time I saw my parents. But that day, in that tense courtroom, they had no idea their disappointment was about to unleash a storm that would shatter their entire world. My name is Anna, and I'm 31. For as long as I can remember, I've been the black sheep, the family failure, the one they conveniently forgot existed when relatives asked about their children. My mother's eyes rolled in disgust the moment I stepped into the courthouse, and my dad, he just stared into the distance, as if acknowledging me would somehow tame him. "Don't embarrass us," my mother hissed as we walked through the doors. "Just stay quiet and let the real lawyers handle this." I said nothing, just kept walking, the click of my heels a confident drumbeat against the marble floor. That confidence? I'd built it from scratch, piece by agonizing piece, over years. We were in Omaha, Nebraska, because my parents, who saw their inherited rental properties as a personal kingdom, were trying to evict a tenant named Claire. Claire, a woman in her 40s, had the audacity to ask for repairs, for black mold blooming in her daughter's bedroom and a ceiling that leaked like a sieve, before she'd pay rent. My mother, bless her heart, had called it a little moisture. A little moisture. She was furious Claire had withheld rent, spitting, she signed a contract. She doesn't get to just stop paying because she's picky. I only knew about the case because my younger sister, Melissa, who at 28 still lived under their suffocating thumb, had mentioned it during one of our rare calls. What Melissa didn't know, what they didn't know, was that I'd spent the last 7 years clawing my way through law school. I worked 3 jobs, slept in my car more times than I could count, and finally, miraculously, passed the bar exam. I did it all alone. Not a single dollar, not a single word of encouragement from them. They didn't even know I'd gone to college. The day I walked out of their house at 19, my father had thrown my belongings onto the front lawn. "You're nothing," he'd screamed. "You'll never amount to anything without us." My mother, arms crossed in the doorway, had added, "Don't come crawling back when you fail." I never did. Even when I was so exhausted from overnight shifts I could barely stay awake in class. Even when I was sleeping in my car, surviving on vending machine snacks. I would rather have starved than beg from people who had made it crystal clear I was worthless. Now, as we approached the courtroom, I watched my mother smooth her expensive blouse, adjust her pearls, always the picture of propriety, always obsessed with appearances. My father, in his tailored suit, looked the picture of respectability. They'd told everyone at their country club they only had one daughter, Melissa, the obedient one who worked as a receptionist, and let them control her life. "I don't know why you even came," my mother muttered, not bothering to lower her voice. "This doesn't concern you." I just smiled. Let them think I was just a curious observer. Let them think I was still the broken girl they'd discarded. Inside, the air was thick with desperation. Claire sat at the defendant's table, small and worn, her dress faded, her eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion. This wasn't just an apartment to her, it was her daughter's home, her security. My parents took their seats on the plaintiff's side, and my mother gestured for me to sit behind them in the gallery. I walked right past her. Without a word. My gaze was fixed on Claire's table. I could feel my mother's eyes burning into my back, practically hear her mind racing. "Excuse me," I said quietly to Claire, setting my briefcase down. "I'm your attorney." Her eyes, already wide with worry, widened further. I couldn't afford an attorney. I was going to represent myself. I gave her a small, reassuring smile. "Consider this pro bono. I've reviewed your case. You have every right to withhold rent until those repairs are made. Your landlords violated the implied warranty of habitability." Behind me, I heard my mother's sharp gasp. Then my father's voice, low and laced with pure fury. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I turned slowly. For the first time in 12 years, I looked my parents directly in the eye. "I'm doing my job." My mother's face went from pale to a livid red. "You can't be serious. You're not a lawyer." I pulled out my bar card, held it up for them to see. "Actually, I am. I passed the bar exam 2 years ago. I've been working at a firm downtown, mostly handling tenant rights cases. This is exactly my area of expertise." My father stood up, hands clenched into fists, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. "This is ridiculous. You dropped out of community college. You're a homeless bum we threw out for being a waste of space." I remained calm, my voice steady. "I was homeless for a while, yes. Thanks to you. But I worked my way through school. I graduated from college, then law school. I did it all without a single cent from you." The judge entered just then, before my father could unleash another torrent of abuse. Judge Patricia Holbrook, a woman in her 60s with steely gray hair and a no-nonsense air, commanded silence. Her eyes swept the room, then landed on me. A flicker of recognition. "Counsel, please approach," she said. I walked to the bench, joined by my parents' attorney, a smarmy man named Gerald who charged $500 an hour. Judge Holbrook looked between us, then at her papers. "I see we have representation for the defendant now." "Counselor Anna Thompson, Your Honor," I stated. "I'm representing Claire Mitchell." Judge Holbrook's eyebrows rose slightly. "Anna Thompson. I thought that name looked familiar. Didn't you argue the Riverside Apartments case last year?" "Yes, Your Honor. You won that case, if I recall. The tenants got everything they asked for. Repairs, rent reimbursement, and damages." "That's correct, Your Honor." She looked at my parents, then back at me. Something shifted in her expression. "This should be interesting. Let's proceed." As I walked back to my table, I caught my mother's expression, pure, unadulterated horror mixed with disbelief. My father looked like he'd been slapped. Melissa, sitting behind them, had her hand over her mouth, eyes wide. I sat next to Claire, who was staring at me like I'd just walked on water. "Thank you," she whispered, tears in her eyes. "I don't know how to thank you. Just tell the truth when you're asked questions," I told her. "That's all you need to do." Gerald stood first, smoothly presenting my parents' case. He painted Claire as a difficult tenant, looking for excuses, making mountains out of molehills over minor maintenance issues. He showed photos of the apartment from years ago, pristine. "The plaintiffs have always maintained their properties to the highest standards," Gerald droned. "They're responsible landlords who simply want what they're owed. The rent agreed upon in a legally binding contract." When it was my turn, I walked to the evidence table. I'd spent 2 weeks gathering everything: photos of the leaking ceiling, the black mold, the broken windows that wouldn't close. I had medical records showing Claire's daughter had developed respiratory problems, maintenance requests ignored for months, and a city inspector's report that condemned parts of the building as uninhabitable. "Your Honor," I said, laying out the evidence piece by piece, "the defendant didn't withhold rent out of spite or convenience. She withheld it because the apartment she was paying for had become a health hazard. Nebraska law is clear: landlords must maintain properties in a condition fit for human habitation. When they fail to do so, tenants have the legal right to withhold rent until repairs are made." I walked the judge through every violation, every ignored request, every broken promise. My parents had collected rent for months, knowing the building was falling apart, knowing it was a health risk. They'd threatened Claire, told her to leave if she didn't like it, fully aware she couldn't afford to break her lease. "This isn't about a difficult tenant," I concluded. "This is about landlords who saw their tenants as nothing more than a revenue stream, who cared more about collecting money than ensuring the people living in their buildings were safe." Judge Holbrook listened intently, making notes, asking pointed questions. When I showed her the medical records for Claire's daughter, I saw her jaw tighten. "Counselor," she said to Gerald, "did your clients know about the mold?" Gerald shuffled his papers. "They were aware of some moisture issues, but did they know about the mold?" she repeated. "Yes, Your Honor, but they dispute that it was as severe as the tenant claims." "The city inspector's report says otherwise," Judge Holbrook said, looking at my parents with barely concealed disgust. "In fact, it says the entire unit should have been vacated months ago." My mother opened her mouth, but my father grabbed her arm, stopping her. Judge Holbrook turned back to me. "Continue, Counselor." I presented the rest of my evidence, building the case brick by brick. By the time I finished, there was no doubt. My parents had been negligent landlords at best, criminally negligent at worst. They'd put a child's health at risk for a paltry $1,200 a month. "Your Honor," I said in closing, "my client isn't asking for much. She's asking for what she's legally entitled to, a safe place to live. She's asking for repairs, for the conditions that forced her to withhold rent to be remedied. And she's asking for reimbursement for the medical expenses her daughter incurred as a direct result of living in an unsafe environment." I sat down. Claire reached over and squeezed my hand, tears of relief, not despair, in her eyes. Judge Holbrook looked at my parents for a long moment. "I'll be honest with you," she said, her voice heavy. "I've seen a lot of landlord-tenant disputes in my years on the bench, but this is one of the more egregious cases I've encountered." My mother's face had gone from red to white. My father looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. "I'm ruling in favor of the defendant," Judge Holbrook continued. "Not only will the eviction be dismissed, but the plaintiffs will be required to make all necessary repairs within 30 days. Additionally, they will reimburse the defendant for 3 months of rent and all medical expenses related to her daughter's respiratory issues. And just so we're clear, if these repairs aren't completed to code within the specified time frame, I will personally refer this case to the city for further action." She banged her gavel. It was over. Claire broke down sobbing, thanking me over and over. I helped her gather her things, walking her out of the courtroom, her hand clinging to my arm. Behind us, I could hear my parents arguing with Gerald in furious, hushed voices. Outside, Claire hugged me tightly. "You saved us," she whispered. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "You don't have to," I said. "Just take care of your daughter." She left, still crying, and I stood there for a moment, letting the weight of what had just happened settle over me. 12 years. 12 years of being told I was worthless. Of being treated like I didn't exist. Of fighting every single day to prove I was more than they said. And now, in one afternoon, I'd proven them wrong in the most public way possible. I was gathering my things when I heard footsteps. My mother stood there, her face contorted with rage. "How dare you?" she spat. "How dare you humiliate us like that?" "I did my job," I said calmly. "Your job? You call destroying your own family your job." "You're not my family," I said. The words came out flat, emotionless. "You stopped being my family the day you threw me out with nothing." My father appeared beside her, his face purple with anger. "You ungrateful little. I'm not the one who should be ashamed here," I cut him off. "You put a child's health at risk because you were too cheap to fix a leaking roof. You're lucky Judge Holbrook didn't refer you for criminal charges. We raised you," my mother cried, her voice cracking. "We gave you everything." I laughed. A bitter sound that echoed in the empty hallway. "You gave me nothing. Everything I have, I earned on my own. And you know what? I'm glad you threw me out. Because it taught me exactly who you are, people who care more about money and appearances than about doing what's right." I walked past them, head held high, leaving them standing there in their expensive clothes, their pride shattered. But even as I walked away, I knew this wasn't over. My mother never let anything go. Neither did my father. I drove back to my office in a daze, replaying the entire scene. The judge's recognition. The horror in my parents' eyes. Claire's gratitude. It all felt surreal. My firm, Kestrel and Associates, was in a renovated warehouse downtown. Not fancy, but it was home. Diane Kestrel, the senior partner, had given me my first real break. She'd seen something in me, something that made her take a chance on a woman with no connections and a resume that had lived in a car as a gap year experience. I'd been there 2 years, taking cases bigger firms wouldn't touch. Tenant rights, workers' compensation, disability claims. The kind of law that didn't make you rich, but helped people who desperately needed it. Diane always said we were in the business of leveling playing fields, and I believed her. This job had given me purpose. It showed me that everything I'd suffered through had been worth it if I could use it to help others. When I walked into the office, Diane was waiting in the conference room. Word traveled fast. "You did good work today," she said, motioning for me to sit. "Claire called me right after court. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her, but she wanted me to know what you did for her." "I just presented the facts," I said. "No." Diane shook her head. "You gave her hope. You showed her that the system could work, that people like her don't have to just accept being trampled on." "That's not nothing, Anna." My throat tightened. "Thank you. But we need to talk about something else." Diane's expression grew serious. "Your parents. They're not going to let this go, are they?" "No," I admitted. "They're not. Do you think they'll retaliate?" "I know they will. They'll try to discredit me, ruin my reputation. They have money and connections. They'll use both." Diane was quiet for a moment. "We'll deal with it. But Anna, you need to be prepared. People like your parents, when they feel cornered, they can be dangerous. Not physically necessarily, but they'll go after everything you've built." "I know," I said. "But I couldn't just stand by and watch them hurt people. Not anymore." "I understand. And for what it's worth, I'm proud of you. What you did today took courage." After Diane left, I sat alone, staring out at the Omaha skyline. The sun was setting, painting everything in shades of orange and gold. It was beautiful, but I couldn't shake the feeling that a storm was coming. My phone buzzed. A text from Melissa. "Mom and Dad are furious. They're talking about suing you. Please be careful." I didn't respond. What was there to say? Of course they were furious. Of course they wanted revenge. That's who they were. People who couldn't stand to be challenged, who would rather destroy someone than admit they were wrong. But I'd faced worse than their anger. I'd survived homelessness, poverty, years of emotional abuse. Whatever they threw at me now, I could handle it. At least, that's what I told myself. As I packed up to leave, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Anna Thompson?" A man's voice. "Yes, who is this?" "My name is Henry Bradford. I was your grandfather's attorney. I need to speak with you about something urgent, something your parents don't know about." My heart started racing. "What is it?" "Not over the phone. Can you meet me tomorrow morning? 9 a.m. at my office." "Yes, I'll be there." He gave me the address and hung up. I stood there, phone in hand, my mind spinning. What could my grandfather's attorney want after all these years? My grandfather had died 12 years ago, his estate settled. What could possibly be urgent now? I had a feeling I was about to find out, and something told me it was going to change everything. Henry Bradford's office was in an old downtown building, the kind with marble floors and brass fixtures from the 1920s. I arrived at 9 a.m. sharp, stomach churning. The receptionist led me to a corner office where Henry, a man in his 70s with white hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, sat behind a massive oak desk. He stood when I entered. "Anna, thank you for coming on such short notice." "You said it was urgent," I replied, shaking his hand. "What's this about?" He gestured for me to sit, then pulled a thick folder from his desk drawer. "I've been your grandfather's attorney for 40 years. When he died, I handled his estate according to his wishes. But there was one provision in his will that was kept sealed. A provision that could only be opened under specific conditions." My pulse quickened. "What kind of provision?" "Your grandfather loved you very much, Anna. He saw how your parents treated you, and it broke his heart. So he made arrangements to protect you." Henry opened the folder and slid a document across the desk. "He established a trust fund in your name. $50,000 to be released when you turned 30 or when you obtained a professional degree, whichever came first." I stared at the document, unable to speak. $50,000. It was more money than I'd ever had. "You passed the bar exam 2 years ago," Henry continued. "That met the conditions. The money has been sitting in trust, accumulating interest. It's now worth nearly $60,000. Why didn't you tell me sooner?" My voice was barely a whisper. "Your grandfather's instructions were explicit. The trust was to remain completely confidential until you met the conditions. He didn't want your parents to know about it. Didn't want them to interfere or try to claim it for themselves. He knew them too well." I thought about my grandfather, the quiet man who'd always had a kind word for me when my parents didn't. He'd been the only one who believed I could be something more. "There's something else," Henry said, pulling out an envelope. "Your grandfather wrote you a letter. He asked me to give it to you when the time came." My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside, a single sheet of paper covered in his careful handwriting. "Dear Anna, asterisk if you're reading this, then you've done what I always knew you could do. You've made something of yourself, despite everything they've thrown at you. I'm proud of you. Even though I won't be there to tell you in person, I know your parents have made your life difficult. I've watched them favor your sister. Watched them tear you down whenever you tried to rise. It broke my heart, but I couldn't change them. All I could do was try to give you a foundation to build on. This money isn't a solution to all your problems, but it's a start. Use it wisely. Build the life you deserve. And remember, you're worth more than they will ever understand. Asterisk asterisk, there's one more thing I need you to know. I was planning to change my will completely to leave you half of everything. Half the properties, half my savings. You deserved it more than they did. But I ran out of time. Be careful, Anna. Your parents are not good people. They care more about money than anything else, even family. Don't let them destroy you. You're stronger than they are. Asterisk love always." Grandpa tears streamed down my face. He had wanted to give me more. He'd been planning to change his will to ensure I was truly taken care of, but he died before he could. "There's something you should know," Henry said gently. "The week before your grandfather died, your mother came to see me. She was asking questions about his will, about whether he'd made any recent changes. I didn't tell her anything, of course, client privilege. But she was very persistent, very concerned about the estate." A chill ran down my spine. "You think she knew he was planning to change the will?" "I can't say for certain," Henry said, choosing his words carefully. "But the timing was suspicious. Your grandfather was in perfect health one week, and the next week he was dead. Heart failure, they said, but he'd just had a physical exam, and his doctor told him he had the heart of a man 20 years younger." "What are you saying?" Henry leaned back. "I'm saying that when someone stands to lose a significant inheritance, they might do things they wouldn't otherwise do. I'm saying that your grandfather's death was very convenient for your parents. And I'm saying that if you look closely at the circumstances, you might find some questions that were never properly answered." My mind reeled. Was he suggesting what I thought he was suggesting? That my parents had something to do with my grandfather's death? "I have no proof," Henry continued. "Just an old lawyer's suspicions. But I thought you should know, especially now that you've gone up against them in court. They've shown you what they're capable of when their money is threatened. Imagine what they might do if the stakes were even higher." I left Henry's office in a daze, clutching the folder. $60,000. Enough to pay off my student loans, to have a real emergency fund. Enough to finally breathe. But all I could think about was Henry's words. "Your grandfather's death was very convenient for your parents." I drove to the public library and spent the next 3 hours digging through old newspaper archives. I found my grandfather's obituary, brief and respectful, died peacefully at home, surrounded by family. But then I found another article, smaller, from a week later. A letter to the editor from my grandfather's longtime physician, Dr. Russell Hayes, expressing shock at the sudden death of a patient he'd just examined and declared healthy. I found Dr. Hayes's contact information and called his office. He'd retired 5 years ago, but the receptionist gave me his home number. He answered on the third ring. "Dr. Hayes, my name is Anna Thompson. I'm calling about my grandfather, James Thompson. You were his doctor." There was a pause. "James Thompson. Yes, I remember him. A good man. His death was such a shock. Can I ask you something? You wrote a letter to the newspaper saying you were surprised by his death. Why? Another pause, longer this time. Are you asking as his granddaughter, or in some other capacity? I'm an attorney, and I have reason to believe there might have been something suspicious about his death. Meet me at Elmwood Park in an hour, Dr. Hayes said. There's something you need to know. Dr. Hayes was sitting on a bench near the pond, feeding breadcrumbs to ducks. He was in his 80s now, stooped, hands liver spotted, but his eyes were sharp. Thank you for meeting me, I said, sitting beside him. He didn't look at me, just kept tossing breadcrumbs. I've carried this guilt for 12 years. Maybe it's time to let it go. What guilt? Your grandfather came to see me 2 days before he died. He was concerned about some symptoms: nausea, dizziness, tingling in his extremities. I ran some tests, but the results wouldn't be back for a week. I told him it was probably nothing. Maybe a virus. I sent him home. What were the test results? They showed elevated levels of digoxin in his blood. Digoxin is a heart medication, but your grandfather wasn't taking any heart medication. The levels were high enough to cause arrhythmia. Heart failure. High enough to kill someone. My breath caught. You're saying he was poisoned? I'm saying that someone gave him digoxin, probably in his food or drink, over several days. By the time the test results came back, he was already dead. I went to the police, but they said there wasn't enough evidence to open an investigation. The medical examiner ruled it natural causes, heart failure. They said the digoxin in his system could have been a false positive, or residue from some other medication. Without an autopsy showing clear poisoning, they wouldn't pursue it. Why didn't you push harder? Dr. Hayes finally looked at me. Shame filled his eyes. Your father came to see me. He said the family wanted to remember James peacefully, without the trauma of an investigation. He said it would destroy your grandmother to think someone had hurt him. And he offered me money. A lot of money to let it go, to accept the medical examiner's ruling and move on. You took the money. To my eternal shame, yes. I was 3 years from retirement, and my wife had just been diagnosed with cancer. We needed the money for her treatment. So I told myself it was probably nothing, that I was seeing conspiracies where there were none. I let them bury your grandfather without answers. I felt sick. My father had bribed Dr. Hayes to stay quiet about evidence of poisoning. That meant he knew exactly what had killed my grandfather. Which meant he'd either done it himself or helped cover it up. Dr. Hayes, would you be willing to testify to this? To put it in a sworn statement. He nodded slowly. Yes. I'm old now, and my wife passed away 5 years ago. I don't need their blood money anymore, and I don't want to die carrying this secret. If you're going after them, I'll help you. I got Dr. Hayes' statement recorded and notarized that same afternoon. Then I went straight to the district attorney's office. The DA, a sharp woman named Catherine Morris, listened to everything. She looked at the documents, read Dr. Hayes' statement, and leaned back in her chair. This is serious, she said. If what you're saying is true, we're looking at murder, but it's been 12 years. Physical evidence will be long gone. We need more than just elevated digoxin levels and a doctor's suspicions. What about motive? I asked. My grandfather was about to change his will. My parents stood to lose millions if he did. Henry Bradford, his attorney, can testify that my mother was asking questions about the will right before he died. That's circumstantial. We need something concrete. Bank records showing they were in financial trouble. Proof they purchased digoxin. Witnesses who saw them administering it. Something. I left the DA's office feeling frustrated. I had enough to raise suspicions, but not enough to prove anything. My parents had covered their tracks well. But then I remembered something. When I was younger, before everything fell apart, my mother kept meticulous records of everything. She had files for every receipt, every bill, every transaction. She was obsessed with documentation, with having proof. And if she was that obsessive 12 years ago, I called Melissa. We hadn't spoken since the courthouse, and I wasn't sure she'd answer. But she did on the 4th ring. Anna, she said quietly. I need your help with something. I can't. Mom and Dad are furious about the court case. They forbade me to talk to you. Melissa, I think they killed Grandpa. Silence on the other end. What? I told her everything. The trust fund, Henry's suspicions, Dr. Hayes' statement about the digoxin poisoning. I told her about my grandfather's plans to change his will, my mother's suspicious visit to Henry's office, the bribe to Dr. Hayes. That's impossible, Melissa said, but her voice wavered. They wouldn't. They couldn't. They put a child's health at risk to save money on repairs, I said. They threw me out onto the street when I was 19. They sued me for emotional distress when I stood up to them. What makes you think they're above murder? But Grandpa, he was their father. He was also worth $2 million, and they were about to lose half of it. Melissa was quiet for a long time. Then she said, what do you need from me? Mom keeps records, right? Financial documents, receipts, everything. Does she still have files from 12 years ago? Yes. She keeps everything in the storage room in the basement. It's all organized by year. I need you to look for anything from the months before Grandpa died. Bank statements, credit card bills, pharmacy receipts, anything that might show they were in financial trouble or that they purchased digoxin. Anna, I can't just go through their private files. Yes, you can. Because if I'm right, they murdered our grandfather for money. And they've spent the last 12 years living off that blood money while letting everyone think he died. Naturally. Don't you want to know the truth? Another long silence. I'll look. But Anna, if I find something, if this is real, what happens to them? They go to prison, I said simply. For the rest of their lives. And what happens to me? I didn't have an answer for that. If my parents went to prison, Melissa would be left alone. The golden child, the favorite, the one they'd spent their lives protecting. She'd have nothing, no family, no illusions. I'm sorry, I said finally. But the truth matters more than comfort. I'll call you tomorrow, Melissa said and hung up. I sat in my car outside the DA's office, staring at my phone. I just asked my sister to betray our parents to help me send them to prison. Part of me felt guilty. But a larger part felt nothing but cold determination. If they'd really killed my grandfather, they deserved whatever happened to them. The next 24 hours were the longest of my life. I couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on work. I kept imagining what Melissa might find, kept playing out scenarios in my head. What if there was proof? What if there wasn't? What if Melissa changed her mind and told our parents what I was doing? But the next evening, Melissa called. I found something, she said, her voice shaking. Anna, I found something bad. We met at a coffee shop on the edge of town, far from anywhere our parents might see us. Melissa looked terrible, pale and hollow-eyed, like she hadn't slept either. She sat across from me and slid a folder across the table with trembling hands. I went through everything, she said. Bank statements, credit card bills, all of it. And I found these. I opened the folder. Inside were copies of credit card statements from the 3 months before my grandfather died. There were charges to pharmacies, medical supply companies, online retailers. Melissa had highlighted several entries in yellow. This one, she pointed to a charge from an online pharmacy, is for Digitalis purpurea seeds. That's foxglove. It contains digoxin naturally. You can extract it if you know how. My heart pounded. They bought the poison. That's not all. She pulled out more papers. Look at these bank statements. 2 months before Grandpa died, their checking account was overdrawn by $30,000. They had maxed out 3 credit cards. They were drowning in debt. I stared at the numbers. My parents had been nearly bankrupt. They'd made bad investments, overspent, and run themselves into a financial hole. And then, conveniently, my grandfather died. And they inherited everything. There's more, Melissa said quietly. She pulled out a small notebook. I found this hidden in Mom's desk drawer. It's her handwriting. I opened the notebook. The first few pages were ordinary grocery lists, appointment reminders. Nothing unusual. But then I found a page dated 3 weeks before my grandfather's death. Asterisk J says he's changing the will. Giving half to Anna. Can't let that happen. We'll lose everything. Need to act fast. Asterisk my hands shook as I turned the page. Asterisk research shows digoxin hard to detect. Natural compound could look like heart failure. J takes tea every morning. Easy to add to tea. Asterisk the next entries were dosage calculations. Research notes about how much digoxin would be needed to cause heart failure without being immediately obvious. The final entry was dated the day after my grandfather died. Asterisk it's done. Doctor said heart failure. No one suspects. We're safe. Properties are ours. Asterisk I looked up at Melissa. She was crying silently, tears streaming down her face. She killed him, Melissa whispered. Mom killed Grandpa. She planned it. She researched it. She did it. And Dad must have known. He helped cover it up. I carefully photographed every page with my phone, then looked at Melissa. Are you willing to testify to where you found these? To confirm this is your mother's handwriting. She nodded, wiping her eyes. I have to. I can't. I can't protect them anymore. Not after this. Grandpa was good to us. He loved us. And they killed him for money. Melissa, once we take this to the police, there's no going back. They'll be arrested. They'll go to trial. Everything will come out. I know. Her voice was small but steady. But it's the right thing to do. You taught me that in the courtroom when you stood up for Claire. You showed me what it means to do the right thing, even when it's hard. Even when it costs you something. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Thank you. I know this isn't easy. Nothing about this is easy, she said. But Grandpa deserves justice, and you deserved better than what they did to you. I'm sorry it took me so long to see that. We went to the police station together. Catherine Morris, the DA, was called in even though it was after hours. We laid out everything. The trust fund, Dr. Hayes' statement, the financial records, the notebook. Catherine's expression grew darker with each piece of evidence. This is enough, she said. Finally. We can get a warrant. We'll arrest them tonight. Tonight? Melissa's voice cracked. The longer we wait, the more chance they have to destroy evidence or flee. If they realize what's happening, they might run. We need to move fast. 2 hours later, I sat in Catherine's office, watching through a monitor as police officers arrived at my parents' house. Melissa sat beside me, gripping my hand so tightly it hurt. We watched our mother answer the door in her expensive robe. Watched her face change from confusion to horror as the officers read her rights. We watched our father try to bluster his way out of it, watched him be handcuffed and led to a patrol car. "It's real," Melissa whispered. "It's really happening." I felt numb. All those years of being told I was worthless, of being thrown away like garbage. It all came from people who were capable of murder. People who had killed a kind old man because he wanted to make sure I was taken care of. The arraignment was set for the next morning. Catherine had enough evidence for charges of first-degree murder, evidence tampering, and fraud. The bail was set at $2 million, exactly the amount they'd received from my grandfather's life insurance policy. They couldn't pay it. They'd spent most of the money already, and their assets were frozen pending investigation. My parents would sit in jail awaiting trial. The news spread fast. Within 24 hours, every local station was covering the story. Prominent landlords arrested for murder. Woman discovers parents killed grandfather. 12-year-old murder case reopened. My face was everywhere, and so was Melissa's. The press painted me as the heroic daughter who uncovered the truth and painted my parents as monsters who'd literally gotten away with murder for over a decade. The firm was flooded with calls. Some from former tenants of my parents wanting to share their own stories of abuse and negligence. Others from attorneys offering support. A few from news outlets wanting interviews. But one call stood out. It came 3 days after my parents' arrest. From a lawyer representing Claire. "Anna, you need to know something," the lawyer said. "After your parents were arrested, 3 other tenants came forward. They all had similar stories: unsafe conditions, threats, intimidation. But one of them, a man named Thomas, said your father threatened him last year. Told him if he didn't drop his complaints about a broken furnace, he'd end up like your grandfather. Thomas thought it was just a figure of speech, but now it sounds like a confession," I finished. "Exactly. Thomas is willing to testify. This could strengthen the prosecution's case even more." I thanked the lawyer and hung up. My father had practically admitted to murder, had used my grandfather's death as a threat. The arrogance of it, the absolute certainty that they'd gotten away with it. It made me sick. That evening, Melissa and I met at my apartment. She'd moved out of our parents' house, was staying with a friend. She looked lost and broken. But there was something else in her eyes, too, a kind of clarity she'd never had before. "I keep thinking about all the signs I missed," she said. Or maybe didn't want to see. The way they talked about Grandpa after he died, like they were relieved more than sad. The way they spent money so freely right after the inheritance came through. How they always discouraged me from asking questions about his death. "You were young," I said. "And they were your parents. You trusted them." "I shouldn't have. I should have questioned things. Should have stood up for you when they kicked you out. Should have done a lot of things differently." She looked at me with tears in her eyes. "Can you forgive me?" "There's nothing to forgive," I said. "You were caught in their web, too, just in a different way. They manipulated you, used you. But you broke free. That's what matters." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "What happens now?" "Now we wait for trial. We testify. We make sure they never hurt anyone else again. And after that." I thought about it. After the trial, after justice was served, what would be left? Melissa and I would have each other, but we'd never have a family the way other people did. We'd never have parents we could trust. Holidays without ghosts. A past we could look back on without flinching. But maybe that was okay. Maybe we could build something new, something better. Maybe we could be the family we'd never had. After that, I said, we figure out how to move forward together. Melissa smiled, a fragile but genuine smile. "Together," she repeated. Outside my apartment window, the sun was setting over Omaha. Tomorrow would bring more headlines, more questions, more pain to process. But tonight, sitting with my sister, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt like maybe, finally, things were going to be okay. The trial began 6 months later in a courtroom packed with reporters, former tenants, and curious onlookers. I sat in the front row with Melissa, both of us dressed in dark, conservative suits. Across the aisle, my parents sat with their attorney, a desperate-looking man named Frank, who'd taken their case because no one else would. My mother looked nothing like the polished woman who'd walked into the courthouse 6 months ago. Her hair had gone gray, her expensive clothes replaced with an orange jumpsuit. She'd aged a decade in jail. My father sat hunched beside her, defeated before the trial even started. Judge Holbrook presided, the same judge who'd ruled in Claire's favor. When she saw me, she gave a slight nod of acknowledgement. I nodded back. The prosecution's case was devastating. Catherine Morris laid out the evidence piece by piece, building an undeniable narrative of greed, premeditation, and murder. She presented the financial records showing my parents' desperate situation. She showed the notebook with my mother's handwriting, her research into digoxin, her cold calculation of dosages and methods. Dr. Hayes testified about the elevated digoxin levels, about my father's bribe to keep him quiet. His voice shook as he admitted his complicity, as he apologized for staying silent for so long. Several jurors wiped their eyes. Henry Bradford testified about my mother's suspicious visit, about her questions regarding the will. He explained how my grandfather had planned to change everything, to give me half his estate to ensure I was protected. He read my grandfather's final wishes aloud, and my throat tightened, hearing those words again. Thomas, the former tenant, took the stand and recounted my father's threat. He said if I didn't shut up about the furnace, I'd end up like his father-in-law. I thought he was just being dramatic. Now I know he was confessing. When it was time for Melissa to testify, she walked to the stand with her head held high. She looked directly at our parents as she swore to tell the truth. "Please describe what you found in your mother's desk," Catherine said. Melissa's voice was steady. "I found a notebook in her handwriting. It detailed plans to poison my grandfather with digoxin extracted from foxglove seeds. It included dosage calculations and notes about how to administer it without detection. The final entry stated that it was done, that he died as planned, and that they were safe." My mother's attorney tried to object, tried to claim the notebook could have been planted or forged, but handwriting experts had already confirmed it was my mother's. There was no disputing it. "Why did you come forward with this evidence?" Catherine asked. Melissa looked at me, then back at the jury. "Because my grandfather was a good man who loved us. He didn't deserve to die for money. And my sister didn't deserve to be thrown away like garbage because our parents were greedy. The truth matters more than protecting people who don't deserve protection." My mother started crying then, loud, theatrical sobs, but no one in that courtroom had sympathy for her. The jury's faces were stone. When it was my turn, I walked to the stand feeling strangely calm. I'd been preparing for this moment for months, but now I felt detached. Catherine asked me to describe my relationship with my parents, and I told the truth. All of it. The favoritism, the abuse, the day they threw me out, the years of homelessness and struggle, the way they tried to destroy my career when I dared to stand up to them. "Why do you think they treated you this way?" Catherine asked. "Because I represented something they couldn't control," I said. "Because my grandfather loved me, and they couldn't stand that. Because if they acknowledged my worth, they'd have to confront their own cruelty. It was easier to pretend I was worthless than to admit they'd failed as parents." My mother's attorney cross-examined me, trying to paint me as vindictive, as someone with an axe to grind. "Isn't it true that you've hated your parents for years? That you've wanted revenge since they kicked you out?" "I didn't hate them," I said. "I was hurt. There's a difference. And I didn't want revenge. I wanted justice for their tenant, for my grandfather, for all the people they'd hurt. If that happened to bring consequences down on them, that's because of their choices, not mine. But you benefit from this, don't you? If they're convicted, you inherit everything." "I don't want their money," I said. And I meant it. I never did. I built my own life without them. The inheritance can go to their victims, the tenants they abused, the people they hurt. I just want them held accountable." The prosecution rested. Frank, my parents' attorney, tried to mount a defense. He called character witnesses who testified my parents were upstanding citizens, generous donors to charity, pillars of the community, but it all rang hollow against the mountain of evidence. When my mother took the stand in her own defense, she claimed the notebook was just dark fiction, that she'd been writing a crime novel, and those were story notes. No one believed her. The trial lasted 3 weeks. When closing arguments came, Catherine stood before the jury and said simply, "They murdered a kind man in cold blood for money. They poisoned him slowly, watched him suffer, and felt no remorse. They've spent 12 years living off blood money while his granddaughter slept in her car. Justice demands a verdict of guilty." The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they returned, the forewoman stood. "On the count of first-degree murder, how do you find?" "Guilty." My mother collapsed, wailing. My father sat motionless, staring at nothing. "On the count of evidence tampering, how do you find?" "Guilty." "On the count of fraud?" "Guilty." Judge Holbrook set sentencing for 2 weeks later. As the bailiffs led my parents away, my mother turned and looked at me. There was hate in her eyes, pure and undiluted. I looked back at her and felt nothing. Sentencing day arrived, cold and gray, matching the somber mood. Judge Holbrook looked down at my parents with an expression of profound disappointment. "I've been on the bench for 27 years, she said, her voice echoing. "I've seen every kind of crime, every kind of criminal, but what you did stands out for its sheer callousness. You murdered your own father, your children's grandfather, for money. You calculated the dosage, administered the poison, and watched him die. And then you spent 12 years living comfortably off his estate while your daughter, the one he wanted to protect, struggled to survive." My mother tried to speak, but Judge Holbrook held up her hand. "You had every advantage: money, education, opportunity. And you used all of it to hurt people. Your tenants lived in squalor while you collected rent. Your daughter was thrown out to fend for herself. And your father, a good man by all accounts, was murdered in his own home. The law requires me to sentence you, but I can tell you that no sentence will ever be enough for what you've done. She looked at the papers. On the count of first-degree murder, I sentence you each to life in prison without the possibility of parole. On the counts of evidence tampering and fraud, I sentence you each to an additional 15 years, to run consecutively. You will spend the rest of your lives behind bars, and that is far less than you deserve. The gavel came down with finality. My mother screamed, a sound of pure anguish that echoed through the courtroom. My father sat silent, tears streaming down his face. As they were led away, my mother turned to me one last time. I hope you're satisfied, she spat. You've destroyed this family. No, I said clearly, standing up so she could hear me. You destroyed this family when you chose money over people, when you chose greed over love. I just made sure everyone knew the truth. She was dragged away, still screaming, and the courtroom erupted. Reporters shouted. Former tenants cheered. Melissa grabbed my hand and squeezed it tight. Outside the courthouse, Catherine Morris held a press conference. Today, justice was served for James Thompson and for all the victims of Helen and Robert Thompson's greed. This case demonstrates that no one is above the law, that wealth and status cannot protect you when you commit crimes. I want to especially commend Anna Thompson and Melissa Thompson for their courage in coming forward, for choosing truth over family loyalty. Reporters turned to me, microphones in my face. How do you feel seeing your parents sentenced to life? Relieved, I said honestly. Not happy, not triumphant, just relieved that they can't hurt anyone else. Will you accept the inheritance? No. Everything they have will go to a fund for their former tenants, the people they actually hurt and exploited. That's what my grandfather would have wanted. What's next for you? I thought about it. I'm going to keep doing what I've been doing. Helping people who need legal representation but can't afford it. Making sure landlords are held accountable. Trying to make the system work for people who usually get trampled by it. That night, Melissa and I went to my grandfather's grave. We hadn't been there together since the funeral 12 years ago. The headstone was simple. James Thompson, beloved father and grandfather. 1940 to 2013, we got them, Grandpa, Melissa said softly, kneeling by the stone. They're going to pay for what they did to you. I knelt beside her. I'm sorry it took so long. I'm sorry you didn't get to see me become an attorney. Didn't get to see me prove them wrong. But I hope you know I never forgot what you told me. That I was worth more than they said. You were right. We sat there for a while in silence. The cold wind rustled through the bare trees. Finally, Melissa spoke. What happens to us now? We're orphans in a way. No parents, no family except each other. We build something new, I said. Something better. We become the family we never had. I'd like that, she smiled, a real smile this time. You know, I've been thinking about going back to school, maybe becoming a paralegal, working with you at the firm. Diane would love that. We're always short-staffed. It's strange, Melissa said. I spent my whole life trying to be what they wanted, the perfect daughter, the obedient one. And it was all for nothing. They didn't really love me. They just loved that I was easy to control. They were incapable of real love, I said. That was their failing, not yours and not mine. We deserved better parents. Grandpa knew that. We left flowers on the grave, violets, his favorite. As we walked back to the car, I felt something shift inside me. The anger that had driven me for so long, the need for vindication, the burning desire to prove myself. It was fading. Not gone entirely, but quieter now. Manageable. Anna, Melissa said as we drove away, thank you for not giving up, for fighting, for showing me what courage looks like. You showed courage too, I said. Coming forward with that evidence, testifying against them, that took strength I'm not sure I would have had in your position. We were both strong, she said. Just in different ways, but we're stronger together. I smiled. Yeah, we are. The road ahead was long, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't facing it alone, and that made all the difference. 3 months after the sentencing, I stood in the conference room at Kestrel and Associates, looking at the faces of 23 former tenants of my parents' properties. They'd all come at my invitation to learn about the restitution fund. The court has ordered the liquidation of all assets belonging to Helen and Robert Thompson, I explained. The 3 rental properties have been sold, personal assets, investments, everything. After legal fees and court costs, there's approximately $1.8 million remaining. That money will be divided among all verified victims, tenants who suffered due to unsafe living conditions, people who paid medical bills because of their negligence, anyone who was harmed by their actions. Claire, the woman whose case had started everything, raised her hand. How much will each person get? It depends on the severity of harm and documentation of damages, but we estimate between $30,000 and $70,000 per person. Some will get more if they can prove significant medical expenses or ongoing health issues. A man in the back stood up. That money should go to you. You're the one who brought them down. You sacrificed everything to get justice. I shook my head. I didn't do this for money. I did it because it was right. This money belongs to the people they hurt. I have my grandfather's trust fund. That's more than enough. The meeting continued for another hour, people sharing their stories, crying, hugging each other. These were people who'd been victimized and silenced, who thought no one cared about their suffering. Now they were being heard, being compensated, being vindicated. After everyone left, Diane came into the conference room. That was a good thing you did. A lot of lawyers would have taken a hefty portion as fees. I'm not interested in profiting from my parents' crimes, I said. Besides, I have enough. The trust fund paid off my loans and gave me a cushion. I don't need more. Speaking of which, Diane said, I have a proposition for you. I'm getting older, thinking about retirement in a few years. I'd like you to consider becoming a partner, eventually taking over the firm entirely. I stared at her. Are you serious? Completely. You're the best attorney I've ever trained. You care about the clients. You fight like hell. And you understand what it's like to be powerless. This firm needs someone like that at the helm. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Diane smiled. Think about it. We can discuss details later. That evening, I met Melissa for dinner at a quiet restaurant. She'd started classes at the community college, working toward a paralegal certificate. She looked healthier than I'd seen her in years, with color in her cheeks and light in her eyes. How was your day? She asked. Surreal, I admitted. I distributed almost $2 million to people our parents victimized, and Diane offered to make me a partner in the firm. Melissa's eyes widened. That's incredible. Are you going to accept? I think so. It feels right, you know, like everything I went through led to this. Grandpa would be proud, she said softly. You became exactly who he knew you could be. We ordered our food and talked about normal things, her classes, my cases, whether we should adopt a cat for my apartment. It felt strange and wonderful to have a normal conversation with my sister, a relationship not poisoned by our parents' manipulation. I saw them last week, Melissa said suddenly. At the prison. I put down my fork. Why would you do that? I needed closure, I guess. Needed to see them one more time. She took a shaky breath. Mom tried to guilt-trip me. Said I'd betrayed the family. Dad just cried and said he was sorry. But neither of them actually took responsibility. Even now, even after everything, they can't admit they were wrong. Some people never do, I said. They're too broken. That was their choice, but that's not your burden to carry anymore. I know. She smiled. I'm not going back. That was goodbye for good this time. We finished dinner and walked through downtown Omaha, past the old courthouse where this had all started. I thought about that day 6 months ago, walking into that courtroom expecting nothing, only to change everything. I thought about my mother's disgust, my father's dismissal, the judge's surprise when she recognized me. I thought about how far I'd come from the 19-year-old sleeping in her car, from the girl told she'd never amount to anything. Do you ever wish things had been different? Melissa asked. That we'd had normal parents, a normal childhood? Sometimes, I admitted, but then I think about who I became because of what I went through. The empathy I have for people who are struggling. The drive to fight for justice. The understanding that systemic problems hurt real people. Would I have that if I'd grown up comfortable and privileged? I don't know. So you're saying you're grateful for the trauma? Melissa raised an eyebrow. I laughed. No. I'm saying I'm grateful for who I became in spite of it. There's a difference. We stopped at a coffee shop, the same one where Melissa had first shown me the evidence of our grandfather's murder. So much had changed since that day. So much had been revealed, destroyed, rebuilt. I have something for you, Melissa said, pulling an envelope from her purse. I've been holding on to this. It's another letter from Grandpa. Henry Bradford gave it to me after the trial. He said Grandpa wanted you to have it when everything was settled. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. Dear Anna, asterisk if you're reading this, then you've uncovered the truth about my death. I suspected your parents might try something. I saw the way they looked at my estate, the calculations in their eyes. That's why I made sure to leave evidence to give you tools to find justice if something happened to me. I'm so proud of you. Not just for your accomplishments, but for your character. You have a strength they'll never understand, a moral compass they lack entirely. Use it well. Help people who can't help themselves. Be the person I always knew you were. And remember, the best revenge is living well. Building a life they said you couldn't have. Becoming someone they said you could never be. You've already won, Anna. Everything else is just making sure they face consequences. You are loved. You are worthy. You are enough. Always. Asterisk grandpa tears streamed down my face. Melissa reached across the table and squeezed my hand. He knew, I whispered. He knew what they might do. And he still tried to protect me, even after death. He loved you, Melissa said. Really loved you, the way parents should. I folded the letter carefully and put it in my pocket, right over my heart. I'm going to keep fighting, I said. For people like Claire, like all those tenants, like everyone who gets trampled by people with power and money. That's how I'll honor him. And I'll help you, Melissa said. Once I get my certificate, I'll be right there with you. We'll be a team. I smiled through my tears. A team? I like that. My parents spent their remaining years in separate prisons. Their legacy, greed, murder, and cruelty. My mother died of a stroke 4 years into her sentence, bitter and unrepentant. My father lived longer, spending his days in the prison library, supposedly trying to understand where he'd gone wrong. But according to Melissa, who visited him once before his death, he never truly grasped it. He died believing he'd been unlucky, that he'd gotten caught rather than done wrong. Some people, I learned, are incapable of genuine remorse. The tenants they'd victimized used their restitution to rebuild their lives. Claire sent her daughter to college. Thomas finally got the medical treatment he needed, and 3 families were able to buy their first homes. Their suffering hadn't been erased, but at least it had been acknowledged and compensated. As for me, I became a partner at Kestrel and Associates, and eventually took over when Diane retired. Melissa worked beside me, a brilliant paralegal who understood our clients because she'd felt powerless herself. We built something good from the ashes of our broken family. I never married, never had children of my own. My family was the people I helped, the justice I fought for, and the sister who'd found her courage when it mattered most. And, sometimes, late at night in my office, I'd take out my grandfather's letters and remember that the best revenge isn't destruction. It's becoming everything they said you couldn't be and using that success to help others they would have crushed. I'd built a life from nothing, proved my worth without their approval, and ensured they faced consequences for their crimes. In the end, that was victory enough.